Have you ever had a fear from your childhood come back around in your adult life? Just a little question for you. So, I had an interview this week for a job, and I was fairly confident about it. I would say 80%, right? So, I knew I could do the work. I looked up for like a week and a half of questions that might be asked. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Um, all just the random questions they ask you. What do you feel about what's your what's your weakness, what's your strength? All these interview questions that come up when you have these job interviews. So I was confident, right? Until I got to the interview room. I walked in, shook their hands, said, I appreciate this opportunity, thank you. Tried to have some sort of smile on my face to be engaging and look like I'm happy to be there. So that was a plus. Um, but what I wasn't expecting to happen happened. So they slide this paper across the table and they say, here is your 10 or 12 questions, whatever it was. I think it was 10. Here's your 10, 12 questions. Read them out loud and answer the questions in very good detail. Okay. So answering the questions in detail was not a huge problem. Mentally in my head, I'm like, all right, it's not that big of a deal. But reading these questions, they weren't even hard questions. Reading the questions out loud was probably the most nerve-wracking and hardest part of this whole interview. That lasted about a half an hour, almost 40 minutes. That was probably the worst part, because if you have a fear of reading in front of people and they ask you to read these questions out loud, the fear of what if I don't know a word, if I don't know what the word means, all these thoughts go through my head. And even though the questions were fairly simple, they weren't bad, my brain mentally locked up because of the reading out loud part. In grade school, middle school, elementary school, whatever, teachers always have these books where, or are these chapters, I guess, where they give you a book and they point to somebody in the class and say, all right, you start reading, and every person's going to pick a page or pick a paragraph or whatever it is, and they're going to go all the way around the room. And when it comes to your turn, if you don't know the words or you're unsure about yourself or whatever the case may be, it makes it very difficult as a child to, at least for me, get through that situation, especially in school when you're with these people every day or a couple times a week. And it just gets kind of like nerve-wracking, annoying, to the point where you're going to tell the teacher, like, hey man, I'm struggling with this reading thing, especially out loud. And it's a little embarrassing. And, you can tell your teacher that, but depending on how they feel about it, they can either say, all right, well, try to figure out something different, or, it makes it worse, because even if they skip you, I feel like that's even worse. If they go around every row, they come to you, and then you get skipped and jump to the next person, people start wondering, like, all right, they didn't skip this dude 3 times now. So then it's like, then you start getting picked on, and there's, the whole snowball effect of this guy can't read or whatever. It's just so that whole thing kind of popped in my head, um, which felt like an eternity. But I know it wasn't. It was probably maybe a few seconds, but um, it felt like forever. So I'm sitting in this panel in front of like three people, and as I would answer the questions, I would read the next question in my head to prepare myself, just in case there was something that I wasn't sure about. And then depending on the answer, I would answer it either slower or longer. I'd drag it out a little more, just to almost like give myself time to read it correctly and understand like what they were asking for, you know. And the questions were, like I said, not terrible, but it was like, here's a painting on the wall. It's a flower. It's a vase. But they want you to get more detail. Like, there's a picture. There's a white background. There's a brown table. There's yellow flowers. There's red flowers. There's a green curtain. So it's like you got to break down these jobs of what you're doing, almost like you're training somebody, from day one. If you have somebody with you and you don't know what they're doing. So that's basically how I felt. Like I'm training these guys in the interview of how to do the plumbing job that I know obviously all three of them know, and I gotta explain it to them step by step. If you've done something for a long time, sometimes taking a step back and like breaking it down is hard because you're just so used to doing whatever whatever your job is. It just, you get in the routine and then you just do it. So after the third question, I thought about something, happy, or a song that made me laugh, or maybe a situation. So it kind of like eased that, I guess, emotion of maybe like not being 100% confident, because I lost it kind of quickly. You know what I mean? And I don't know if that affected the interview. Like I said, you can have the qualifications, you can have the paperwork, you can have the years of schooling, you can have the years in the trade, or whatever you have. But it just takes that one thing to like set you off course. And you definitely want the job, but then you're second guessing like, did I go into enough detail in these questions? Did I look kind of weird reading this stuff? So if I get the job or not, it's fine. I'm okay with it either way. But it's like, if you have a childhood memory of these situations and you're not expecting it, especially in an interview, it definitely can bring back some thoughts that are not good. And having an interview is not the place to have these thoughts, especially when you're trying to get a job. So so that's what happened to that. And if you have the situation of having this fear, try to think of something positive, something happy that you can pull from to change your energy from nervous or scared or whatever it is to something positive. And hopefully you can work through it for the short amount of time you got to be there. And if you get the job or not, you can just kind of focus on just moving forward, So it's definitely an interesting experience. It's not something I have been through a lot. I've been through questions, but never questions that I had to personally read out loud. So, like I said, you can do the job perfectly, you can have all the qualifications, but I know everybody's scared of something. Everybody has a fear, right? So people have a fear of like snakes, or like me, birds, heights, Some people are scared of water. Some people are scared of all kinds of things or have a fear, right? So, it just makes it difficult sometimes when you put in these situations that you're not expecting. You know, you can look online and it says all these questions of all these things of how they're going to ask you questions, what they're expecting out of you on these interviews, all these like gurus of how to take these job interviews. You know, you can pass these job interviews like one time. Like you can look up all these channels, but no one ever says, at least that I found, they might ask you to read the questions. So if you're going for a job interview, they might ask you to read the questions. So be prepared for that, because I was not. So hopefully it helps somebody, and I'll see you guys in the next one.